Hi, my name is Jhacole LeGrand-Dunn, and this is a brief video presentation of my research entitled Schooling the Ward, a phenomenological case study on the impact of gentrification on neighborhood public schools in the Greater Third Ward of Houston, Texas. We'll navigate this presentation with an overview of these key research components. Let's start by identifying the problem. Historically connected campuses, or those campuses that are native to the historic Third Ward community, have struggled to maintain enrollment that's consistent with the financial and residential growth of the community itself. The economic, residential, and demographic shifts that have taken place in the historic Third Ward are all a part of the gentrification process. In an effort to really understand gentrification and how it connects to historically connected schools in the Third Ward community, it was important to develop a literature review that first helped us to define what gentrification truly is. To do this, I looked to Ruth Glass, who gave us our first real definition of gentrification. And I supported that by also looking at Philip Clay's phase model for what gentrification looks like in action. Next, it was important to understand perceptions around gentrification, those who are considered gentrifiers and those who have been impacted by the gentrification process. Next, I wanted to look at the developmental versus the human interest in gentrification because both of those are really key in understanding the motivations behind people's actions. Next, it was important to connect the problem, public education, which is at the core of this particular study. How does gentrification really impact the community schools that are part of communities that are going through the gentrification process and the residents who are utilizing these schools as resources in their community? Finally, I wanted to make a connection to our focal point, which is the historic Third Ward of Houston, Texas, for this specific research. As is evidenced and noted in the literature review, prevailing dialogue and scholarly writings on the topic of gentrification tend to focus on housing access and economic shifts. What appears to be lacking are real conversations and writings around what happens to historically connected campuses in gentrifying communities. Also, what is missing are more conversations around what happens to the students and the families that these schools serve. Now let's talk a little bit about how this study was conducted. This was a single instrument case study that employed a phenomenological qualitative approach and design. The purpose of that design was to allow me to source individuals who were residents of Third Ward and had the unique experience of making enrollment decisions for students in grades 6 through 12, where historically connected Third Ward schools were an option for enrollment. By identifying and elevating the voices of these residents, I was able to garner insight and perception around the two guiding questions for this research. First, how do Houston's Greater Third Ward residents' perceptions and experiences regarding neighborhood schools impact campus enrollment and neighborhood school sustainability? And second, what are the perceptions and experiences of new and existing residents of Houston's Greater Third Ward regarding neighborhood schools meeting their children's academic and developmental needs? As a new and developing researcher, I soon learned that quality research acknowledges researcher positionality and perspective. So with that, it's important to note that I am indeed a resident of Houston's historic Third Ward. I am a parent of students in grades 6 through 12. I am an educator with experience in the city's predominant school district, which you'll hear about later on in this presentation. And also, I am a member of various community and civic organizations within the Third Ward community in Greater Houston. This research has a layered theoretical framework. First, it's rooted in social justice and allows us to see when economic shifts occur, how they impact housing access and education access, particularly for marginalized groups. Next, Philip Clay's phase model for gentrification allows us to see gentrification in action and identify that in the historic Third Ward of Houston, Texas, making it a prime model for this particular research. Next, the pragmatic and social constructivism framework allows us to develop understanding when we connect the words of the participants who are residents of the Third Ward and who have had the unique experience of making enrollment decisions for students who are also residents in the community, especially when historically connected schools are an option for those decisions. Finally, Critical theory elicits an understanding and transformation of social order and power. This connects to this idea of when one community was originally inhabited by one group who had the bulk of the power for that particular community. When another entity begins to move in or and shift the population and the demographics, and we begin to see shifts in economics, how that also shifts the power. And that doesn't just impact the residents, but it also impacts many of the resources and structures and facilities that operate within the community. Consistent with the construct of a phenomenological case study, this research depended heavily on the lived experiences, voices, and perceptions of the research participants. Through the use of a maximum variation purposeful sampling questionnaire, I was able to garner qualitative data from parents and guardians of students who were residents of the Greater Third Ward and have a shared phenomenological experience of making decisions on school enrollment with the Greater Third Ward public schools as plausible options based on the age, grade, and academic needs of their students. Once these individuals were identified, I was able to ask them if they would like to participate in an interview. Those who participated in the interview, I recorded those interviews and was able to utilize the transcripts of those interviews through a program called In Vivo that allowed me to utilize the transcripts as data and source trends as well as commonalities in some of the questions or the responses to the questions that were asked of these participants. Each phase of this research provided valuable information that made way for the successful implementation of the social constructivism and pragmatic approaches taken to garner understanding that function as part of the theoretical framework for this study. With each phase of this research, more findings were surfaced. This is a general overview of the key findings. First, gentrification absolutely impacts schools and students. The existing literature suggests that gentrification of residential communities has real and complex consequences for students and schools. In addition, the voices of the participants in this particular study named that they were making decisions and they have made decisions about enrollment in schools in the historic Third Ward based on what they were seeing in terms of shifts in the community and the gentrification process. Next, the Houston's Third Ward is indeed a gentrified community. In Houston's Third Ward, a 176% increase in the median value of homes between 2000 and 2013 provided one of the most notable trends indicating the presence of gentrification in any community. Finally, themes surfaced from the voices of residents included the following ideas. Residents do see value in the historically connected campuses in this community, and they have an active desire to connect with these historically connected campuses. The issue is that they don't feel that the schools market to or meet the academic needs and desires of their students currently and the families for these communities. So what does all of this mean? Enrollment trends for historically connected 6th through 12th grade campuses of Houston's historic Third Ward appear very much aligned with the perceptions and enrollment practices of the community's residents. Low enrollment numbers may ultimately lead to the closing or repurposing of the community's native secondary public school campuses. But this is bigger than Houston's Third Ward. This is a scenario that we are seeing play out nationally and globally. This research experience has afforded me the opportunity to increase my knowledge around the incredibly rich history, culture, and community of Houston's Third Ward. I have been inspired to develop a documentary that I hope will allow me to share this community story for years to come. More immediately, there are two target audiences for the findings of this research: the Houston Independent School District that governs the historically connected campuses of this community, and the civic and social organizations that serve to unite and inform this community's residents. I plan to hold a joint screening of an abbreviated edition of that documentary that highlights the community's historically connected schools and details the data surfaced through this research, as well as the implications and recommendations. This will be followed by a question and answer session that will allow an opportunity for audience members to participate in a future think tank that will lead to the development of actionable steps for school sustainability and preservation. Interested in learning more? Feel free to email me at the email address below. Thanks so much for watching.